evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Summer Program Manager here at the Fine Arts Work Center. Most of you are here because you're participating in one of our amazing summer workshops. You know what's going on tonight. For those of you who are not, the Work Center hosts week-long open enrollment visual arts and writing workshops. You can ask me or any of the staff on hand after the event. If you are here longer than this week, I definitely think you should think about taking steps. One of our favorites of our programs is that every week our incredible faculty mesmerize audiences with presentations and talks. Tonight we're going to hear from two faculty members, poets Martha Collins and Chen Chen. Martha and Chen will both hear from their work, and they will then conduct a joint Q&A with the audience. Housekeeping and other items of interest. Books by both speakers tonight will be available for sale, and they will be signing their books up here at the front of the room after the event. Members of this year's faculty will also be for sale in our bookstore and at the back of the room, as well as some very pretty folk, so be sure to check it out. The new Hudson D. Walker Gallery will be open after the event. Right now, called Density, which features work by former Falk Fellows. Work sold will go to some programs, so be sure to check it out after the event. I would like to give a big shout out to East End Books, who've helped us our bookstore. If you are here taking a class, to sign up to read at Student Day. The sign-up sheet is across the courtyard. And finally, please do us all a favor and turn your cell phone to silent. We will begin with Martha Collins. Martha is a returning member of the Falk Summer faculty and is teaching a workshop this week called Poems About That. Martha's 10th book of poetry, Because What Else Could I Do, won the Poetry Society of America's William Carlos Williams Award. Previous volumes include Blue Front, White Papers, Admit One, and a Scrapbook, and the paired volumes Day Unto Day. Collins in creative writing program and later taught at Oberlin College. Her book, Reports, is forthcoming from Pittsburgh this fall. Her writing has received praise for its self-aware struggle with the big, hard truth, and this is the vehicle of response for Collins, and the richer for having the results of the risks she takes that greatly pay off, calling her collections in years. Please warm Falk welcome to Martha.
Thank you, Sarah. And Maddie and Rennie and Chen and my other fellow faculty and my wonderful poets in my workshop. It's a joy to be here and to be working with you. I'm going to read from two sequences. Both of these sequences are a little elegiac, so don't expect any stand-up. The first is from my most recent book, which Sarah mentioned, called Because What Else Could I Do? The entire book is a sequence of poems that I had my husband sudden and rather shocking death 6 years ago. I didn't intend to publish these poems, and I will say, as a kind of footnote to what Vibe is, that I have found with delving deeply into the eye is to not think. So for me, to think of these poems as not being published, I'm dealing with. Of course, here they are. The poems don't have titles. They're just numbered. And so I will pause between about 8 of them. I is left of you at home in a plastic box on your dresser where you kept your socks and put your chain. And what will I do at home in my own house What will I do with my one spoon and my wide bed? What will I do without? And with you went my son, a friend or two, who was there. And with you went the weeks to come, the months are so far one. My body too, the one I knew as one of two, though you forgot to take desire, which now is right. With you went the one I was, that was, within, without, with you, mostly brave, largely true, the one I find some moments in some darkened place of joy, then in the dream, we are standing together in your kitchen. Finish the dishes. You are wearing your blue white stripes. I have my arm across your shoulders and I am saying, I am glad. And then my hand, so glad we could save you. After my husband died on November 8th, 2016, of course, was election day. The what you will never, the what you missed, the reddening map, the can't, the what the climate, the send them back, the end the public, the rights, the black, the planet, the white. Oh, did we all, the what can we do? The how did I fail? The nothing to do. And the last four poems I'll read from the sequence were written on Cape Cod when we came to Wellfleet in December to scatter my husband's ashes. The first one is Wellfleet, and then LeCount Hollow and Newcomb Hollow Beach. Winding road through trees, the gray pond. Beside the pond, you sat. The empty bench, the still pond. Across the pond, the two white chairs. The chairs reflected where I swim. And when I'd swum almost back in the water and there. Paper bag with empty box with almost empty plastic bag and my hands and my jeans. You, some part or parts of you. We sent you into the sea, low tide, so you easily lightest currents in tiny explosions of white. Finished a sudden sun on the water. You were becoming of sand, as if you were signing yourself in silver. You've ordered twice as much fish as we need, and when I walked out behind you and we met, and you've followed, I'm walking home. Home is miles away in this town, which isn't your town. There are no cars, no lights. I am very afraid. I think I should not be walking alone and not in these shoes, but I am alone, and home is twice as I ever thought it would be. And the last of these poems that I'll read in this. Beach, The last one we walked together, hand in hand in the August sun. And I walked on while you rested there, and now it is winter with almost the last of you in my hand, a tiny part of some parts of you, and your blue eye, shoulder, mouth. I try to journey you into the sea, but a sudden wave rushes over my feet, and the wind catches this part of parts of you, and instead you are in the air, or you are me. You will not let me let you go. You are in to be. You are also in air and sand and earth, and will bear another small part. I lick my finger, and you are in me. So the second is part of my forthcoming book, Casualty Reports, which will be out in October. This is a sequence that occupies two parts of the book. It focuses on coal, and the two parts see. Like most of the poems that I've written, and I've written quite a few in recent years that deal with things larger than me, they all start with me. They start with me and my family connection. My family is a coal mining family, so I begin there. Of course, coal is important to us in other kinds of ways as well. So I'll start with a couple of the personal poems, and then bring us sort of up. In Illinois. My father's father's father owned had a share in the Enterprise mine, the Enterprise Company in 1971. He was a shareholder, being kept a lot of entries, shafts, and air shafts, rooms by number and number of feet. Died 1881. Father's father went down to a river town to work, came back to the mining town. His father went down in the Paradise mine, a miner and later a mine examiner, tested the air and the roof days and holidays to walk 3 miles out and back when there was no train. Father, whose mother kept him out of the mine, kept father's oil lamp, kept his father's carbine and safety lamps, kept a box of wicks, picks, globes, his father's 50-year union pin, his flashlight, safe for use, kept manuals, papers, this lamp, all labeled. This pin was given. It was legacy, labeled, dated 1965, and signed for me. When I was 10, they took me into a report to our class that had seen How Green, a movie set in Wales. The miners had lamps like my grandfather's lamps, and I never forgot the explosion, the wage cuts, the strike, the lost jobs, immigration to countries like our own. And the revolution. Coal to power steam engines, to pump water and lift coal. Coal to coke for furnaces to smelt tools and furnaces to smelt for rails. Trains to transport coal to power, steam engines to power trains, boats to transport coal. Harness the power of, raised to the power of power. The next poem takes its title from a children's book, a whole series of children's books called Now That's Big. And the big thing in this particular poem, and the machine actually lives in Germany. The poem relies not on children, but also the website for the machine. Now that's big. Then they made the largest machine, the heavy, as long as 2.5 football fields. It weighs 13,000 tons, has 18 buckets to overburden that covers the coal. It could fill 10,000 trucks per day, as much as 40,000 workers could. It's continuous, never stops. It's still uncovering 40 million tons each year to electric stations that power much of its country, including itself. It won't stop till 2050, when all coal in the mine where it works will be. Whose lungs were lost to coal dust, black coal, rock dust to lungs. Jobs were lost to strip mines, natural gas, or paid less because. Who sold mineral rights to land when farming replaced jobs. Whose farms subsided were lost. Burning. Mercury, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides from burning coal, our air, and fall upon us as acid rain. The selenium, arsenic, lead from coal in coal ash ponds that leak and spill and pollute our waters. But most of all, the carbon dioxide released by nature's heat that warms our air and melts our glaciers, lifts our dries our lands, fire strengthens and falls and that swell our waters and generate floods. All threaten our coasts and cities, our islands and whole nations consume our animals, plants, insects, whole species, including most likely our own, unless we less. And this is the last poem in the sequence and the last poem I'll read. Sing. Where we find the first coal in Illinois, where we dusted the graves of indigenous people that covered coal in the Southwest, where we dug up animals, plants in their graves and burned them as oil and gas and coal. And throughout our earth, let us grieve for the graves we robbed. Then let us bless the graves of the dead that remain, and over them for the living, the wind, the sun. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. That was so beautiful. Next, we're going to hear from poet Chen Chen. Chen is a new member of the summer this year. He is teaching a workshop this week called On Beginning Again. He's the author of When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Further Possibilities, which was longlisted for the National Book Award and named one of the best of 2017 by the Library Journal, and others. His work has appeared in publications including Poetry, Tin House, The Best American Poetry, Bettering American Poetry, and the Nonrequired Reading. Chen earned his MFA from Syracuse University and is pursuing creative writing at Texas Tech University. Chen is the 2018-2020 Jacob Ziskind Poet-in-Residence at Brandeis University. The Kenyon Review, constant movement between identities, as Chen grappled with the intersectionality of his multiple lives that make up the heart of this work. The Rumpus also describes his history as earnest, funny, and fun. Readers praise the conversational hilarity in his writing. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Chen Chen.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. This is funny. On the podium, there's a thing that says "Turn off cell phones." It's great. So I'm gonna set a timer. Changing my mind to read. Martha, that was incredible. And you're making about like the power of the definite article. And I was just talking with students today in my workshop about, because we start with a haiku exercise. And so I was talking about language that don't have articles as well. Japanese being one of them, Mandarin Chinese, one of my heritage languages. So that's fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna with two poems from my first book, and then I'll move into some poems from a new book of that's coming out this fall. It'll be out and a little later in the UK through Blood Axe Books. But I want this. Keep changing my mind. Okay, but this is the reading's very much inspired by the conversations we had in workshop today. This is called In the City, dedicated to Monica Suk. She's an amazing poet, Cambodian American. These bridges are a feat of engineering. These and chive dumplings we bought together before hopping on a train and crossing bridges. Talking to you, pork and chive dumplings in your inn is an engineer's dream feat of astonishment. Skyline, because the skyline believes in me, forgives me I drew for it. Happens this night, every night, believe being mad and megawatt like the dreams of parents. By the way, is this soy sauce reduced? Do we care? High unabashed exclamation points, making my escape away from the quiet, snowy commas of upstate and the mess of questions marking my Bostonian past. In New York, we read Darwish, we write broken words, finally forgiving the broken English dumplings, and I know it's such a 90s fantasy of multiculturalism that I am rehashing, but still, in New York, I feel I can tell you how my mother and I used to make dumplings together, like a scene of the Joy Luck Club, the small kitchen, the between us, how we dipped index finger, thumb, sealed each dumpling like tucking in a secret, good night. Need of a memory, engineering, a dream of mother and son, interrupted by the father who made my mother get on a plane, a theory, years of nowhere across American nose. He was the father. I try to build a bridge, parents, but only reach my mother, and it's a bridge she's about to jump off of. She jumps, she's swimming, saying, finally, I've learned all this time trying to get from one useless chunk of land to another when I should have stayed in the water. Tap water in your kitchen. I don't know what to tell you. I thought I could tell the story out of itself. And here in my fabulous Tony-winning monologue of a New York, I'm struggling to get to the joy, the luck. I tell you, my mother still boils the water, though she knows she doesn't have to anymore. Her still boils in no time as a feat of engineering. She could boil my food, and he'd come out a better person in beautiful shoes. She could boil the Pacific, every idyllic American pond with its swans. She would. Thank you. This next one is called In This Economy. Thinking about jobs and the economy. In this economy. People person seeks internship in liking you as a friend, respecting you as a serial monogamist seeks change of pace and it up for the summer. And entry-level position teaching guinea pigs how to swim. More of the same. I want to be as beautiful as carrot cake, as 3 firefighters shoveling out a fire hydrant as the whole city after storm. I am knowledgeable in advanced aftermath. I am proficient in scowling. Often I am a counterculture pistachio on casual Friday. This is claim to be post-racial or kind. If you'd like, I can alphabetize all my regrets, but I'll have to start from H. I like a good multi-purpose room. Purpose flower. I excel at pouring tea into the moon. I am too much statuary and not enough city. I'm a collection of collectors. It's pretty okay. One of my collectors is collecting rust from and belief from hearts. I've attended every shade of evening, and they cannot recommend me highly enough. I hold degrees in both my hands, in my mouth. My sole weakness is being my own childhood. Beloved president of ages 3 through 7. My weakness is hoarding even softer and more absorbent, our finest, the supermarket brand, like from one family to another. I am a family of collectors. My father collects newspapers like they're his own memories. We trip over stacks of them in the living room, groan when he quotes from them all housing markets and cloud formations. Car prices are especially out for dinner guests. My weakness is that I listen. My mother saves stamps, like her own children, but better. She can store them in a book when she wants, love them like they've just been born. And the labor agrees, no drugs, no dog, just a pair of scissors, a bucket, warm water, all the wonderment of birth in under 20 minutes. Mother doesn't even have to be physically present. She can go check on our human kids while the water coaxes, releases the stamps from the remaining blocks of envelope. She returns birds and flowers, dead presidents and once popular singers. My weakness is anything paper and anything miniature. My parents' nautical paintings and animals. My boyfriend's stepfather's weakness is vintage farm equipment and antique clocks. I want them to meet. Perhaps I could be a liaison or something else French. In this economy of acute syndrome where just a hobby is the strongest industry and we work overtime at our reverie. My weakness is loving. I want them to meet, but I only see my parents' friend at Thanksgiving. We'll be in the middle of and mapo tofu. Old weird clocks go off. No, not all. Some go off on time at 6, others 6:01, and the rebellious group 6:03. At first, it's a deliberate, unsynchronized idiosyncrasy. But at the next Thanksgiving, when this occurs again, and Mandarin, oh dear, I thought I'd fix them. Sorry about that. Our clocks, he sighs, as though they belong to everyone. Everyone. Okay, what am I? The new stuff. Okay. I think I'll mainly read from this sequence. yay, sequences. And because we were talking in the workshop, the main exercise we did revolved around responding to questions from Bonner Capil's book, The Vertical Interrogation of Strangers. And she has this list of 12. There are other poets, including Jean Valentine, who've made their own responses to the questions. So I have this sequence organized, those. And there are all these really huge, kind of impossible questions, like who are you? How will you live now? What do you remember about the earth? Consequences of silence. And my personal, who is responsible for the suffering of your mother? So, read a bit from this sequence. What do you remember about the earth? The way sometimes he and I are clouds unable to touch, because he possesses strange knowledge, the cruel knowledge that his mother is gone. The way sometimes he looks out into the trees. He said after his mother died, he tried to feel her in the trees in New York. And now the trees are different here, smaller, fewer. He wants my mother and me to talk. He wants to believe he believes I am. And I believe that, the way he turns to me, you. What do you remember about the earth? If we could communicate fully, there would be no need. Love perfectly, there would be no need to love. If we could finish grieving, there would be no need to live. If we could touch completely, there would be no need. Who are you and whom do you love? I know it can't be true that although her favorite swear word in English is definitely shit, my mother spat out the word fuck in more than one conversation, more than one argument we've had. But when I try to remember specific examples of times when my mother said fuck, only one memory emerges. The gay sex, as in whether it was even sex at all. My mother, at first I thought she was searching for the next word, that she was using fucking as a modifier for some horrible noun, fucking sickness. But then she went on, that's just fucking, that's not anything. I found searches for gay porn in internet history. I had forgotten to erase them. I had forgotten to forget them. How can you look at that? She said fucking with such force, invented the word and was testing it out for the first time. What do you know about dismemberment? I write a poem about my mother's meat cleaver, which she uses to chop everything. I write a poem about my mother chopping watermelon. I write a poem about my mother crushing cockroaches with a shoe, slip of newspaper. I write a poem about my mother crying. A short poem about her arguing with my father. A longer poem about her wanting to boil him alive. I panic and hating saying I'm sick of sad endings. A poem in which why. I write a poem in which she has been dead for years. 5 poems in which she doesn't die, she can't, will never. I start a poem in which she has a very long conversation with my boyfriend, then calls me to say, I just had a very long conversation with your boyfriend. It and he were great. I just can't figure out what would come next. Who is for the suffering of your mother? I thought this time I'd write a book just about my father. Where is the other bits? Who is responsible for the suffering of your mother? She says, please. My boyfriend says you should talk to your mother. He reminds me that when his own mother was alive, he would talk to her every week. And my mother is still alive. She called yesterday. It was my birthday, and no one was home. So called your brothers. My mother still has birthdays. She has phones. Mine, cell, she can call. Does. I don't pick up. I should call. My boyfriend nods. I hang up. I don't tell him she asks about the dog before she asks. In fact, she doesn't ask about it. She asks, how is your dog doing? Has he grown very big now? Can you send me another picture? During walks. She asks 5 questions. She says he messes up his name but attempts. Doing very well at work. She says, oh, that's good. I say, yes, and Jeff's the one who's been training the dog. She says, I'm going. I say, it's good. I'm good. Happy birthday. I'm sorry. And I'll close with this other poem. Big, smelly bowel movements this blue January morning. From the living room TV, a commercial from our TV company. We're the fastest, the only, meaning love us above all. What makes poop more pungent on certain days? Science. From the living room TV, law, order, meaning love us or else. Years ago, it to use the word poop in a poem. Today, the seat wakes me. Today, I poop. While my boyfriend room, did you hear that? Meaning the atomic scientists who say minutes at midnight. But still I marvel whenever poop comes out as one true platonic tube. I am trying to be marvelous. I mean, if you shower with soap and eat well, maintaining consistent gastrointestinal for a rim or other forms of anal play. From the TV, a white science sparks 2 sides to every, I mean, up the throat, out the mouth, the fastest, the only way the powerful will let go of their shit. I mean, my boyfriend and I are not into scat, but if you are, I hope fragrant, citrusy shit. I mean, is scat more or less literary than poop? I mean, one winter night, I was sick and pooped the bed. And he just helped strip the sheets, carry it all to the washer. I kept saying, I'm so sorry, shivering, I'm sorry. But he said, what? Hey, I love you. Thank you.
I wasn't writing about it. I was writing to him. And it was a way of keeping him close. I was also, the book also deals with the difficulties of his death. It was a kind of traumatic thing. And so I was partly trying to understand. but I was trying to understand by talking to him. People said, are you seeing a therapist? And I thought, I don't want to see a therapist. I don't want to see somebody, I didn't have a therapist. I don't want to see somebody and talk to a stranger. I want to talk to the person I love. And somewhere along the line, it's kind of a cliche, but I read grief is a form of love. And so they're really love poems. And I couldn't write about, I could only write to. And so virtually every poem in the book, except for a few that are kind of found poems, is addressed to him. And as I say, I didn't really intend, but it's what I had to do. You know, I'm a poet, and it was a resource to turn to. Good luck with figuring out.
If I could build on that, another question for you. So you wrote them as your own personal process, never thinking you'd publish them. What was the process like of getting to the point of publishing them? Was that from you, or was that from other people? How did that whole process happen?
Gosh, this is not a story I tell, but my stepdaughter, my husband's daughter, is a writer, and she was writing about her father's death. And I suddenly realized that I had my own story to tell as well, and it seemed important finally to share it. I think maybe this relates to something I was saying last night too, that what I discovered after I did publish the poems was that they did speak to people, even though I hadn't written them for other people at all, even though they were very, very private. But that was the immediate impact. Then as I sort of decided that this was a book, then it just, you know, took its own way and had its own way with me, shall we say.
For Chen, I guess the big question is, how do you begin? Is there a pattern or a habit? Do different poems start different ways?
Yeah, did everyone hear that? Like, how do I begin? Okay. Yeah, it depends on the poem, but most often I'm like, well, I think of one of my partner's best friends. Recently had this conversation just about like going to see movies, and he's the kind of person who doesn't want to know like anything about the movie before going in. Like, he didn't even want to know like who was in it. It's like just the title and, you know, maybe a bare premise, right? But he was like really intensely, extremely like, I want it to be spoiler free. So that's how I kind of feel a lot of the time with starting a poem. I don't want to have many preconceived notions about where it's going to go, because those create expectations, and expectations lead to disappointment. So I just, I'm like, I'm not gonna expect anything. And maybe something will happen, maybe not, on that particular writing day. So I'll just start with, you know, many poets talk about this, a scrap of language, right? A phrase, a tone, something I just can't, a sound I just can't get out of my head. Where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What kind of a voice could that belong to? What kind of a world could that belong to? And so I just follow it by, you know, sound and tone and intuition. And then, you know, somewhere along the way, I start to get ideas where it can go. And that's where I have to be really careful to not over-determine where it's going to go at a certain point. So I just try to stay really open and receptive to where that piece of language or that fragment of an image is taking me. And I just trust that the things that I'm obsessed about are going to come out anyway, right? Because I'm the one writing it. There's this great little interview clip with Tracy K. Smith where she's like, oh, you think you're writing a poem about a banana, and then oh my God, it's your father again. And it just like shows up, right? And so, yeah, in the past I used to be really like kind of controlling about the process. And it would just lead to these poems that were kind of like dead on arrival, because I'd over-determined, oh, this is the idea I really want to convey. And so now I just try to be open and, you know, slip on a banana peel if that's what is meant to happen.
Actually, right along that same line, Chen, I noticed that the feat of engineering phrase in that one poem, and I'm curious if that falls into that pattern, or at what point in bumping into that language were you like, ooh, there's a thread to pull here?
Yeah, it's like a phrase I would never say in real life. Like, when would you know, maybe taking like some kind of architectural tour and you'd be like, oh, a feat of engineering. It's just like, you know, so I just became kind of fascinated by that piece of language. Like a similar thing, this was years ago, like a friend's grandmother who'd subscribed to the New Yorker for many years, wanted to give me all these back issues that I'd collected, like, I think as a way to kind of clear house out. She's like, oh, you're a writer. You know, like, it's a kind of gift where, you know, when people learn that you're a writer, they're like, oh, I'll give you this, you know, a notebook, a pen. I mean, I love those kind of gifts. So it worked for me. So I had all these old New Yorkers, and I was just going through them, and I was like, oh, what section do I never read? And it was like the financial section. And so I started doing these erasures of the financial section of old New Yorkers, because I was like, what language would I never use, right? And how can I transform that into something that's a poem or poem-like? So I'll often be thinking about that, you know, what kind of language have I never put in a poem? Why or why not? Right? And if there's a particular phrase that really stands out, then I'll see, like, can I delve into that? Yeah, thank you. Oh my God, I love this question. It's so cool. The intimate and the grotesque. Wow. Okay, it's sort of roundabout way of answering, but I just thought of, there's a line from a Mary Oliver poem where she's like, if I ever take you with me into the woods, you must be a very special person, a very dear person. And so gastrointestinal health is a very important subject to me. That if you are close, that's how you know you're close to me, if I am ready and willing to talk about regularity and other related issues with you. It's a sign of love to talk about those bodily functions that we usually don't talk about. Yeah, and there's just something, I mean, it's funny, but it is also intimate, right? But it is also, because it's about your body, it's about your health, it's about your well-being, right? So to be able to share that with someone and know that they'll respond, right, from a place of care, right? That's more than just like, oh, here's like a funny poop joke, but like to actually, as a way to like check in and ask like, oh, how are you doing? How's your body doing, right? And that just increasingly, I mean, over the last couple years, maybe obviously, right, that's such a huge thing, right, to be asking and to honestly talk about, right, how your body is doing. So yeah, I guess that's really how it's connected for me. Is it's a sign of care. It's a sign of love. Yeah.
This is from Dr. Poulin. So I have 3 young children, and I read to them all day long, and I try to find the best books, and I try to figure out what things will resonate with them so that they become really wonderful, open-minded children, and that they embrace the world with this sort of open heart, open mind idea. And I'm interested in hearing how you write, what your process is for writing to young children, and how you approach the subject.
Writing to
You were talking about it earlier about writing to young children, is that right? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Did I say that? I mentioned, and I read a poem that's based on a children's book.
Yes, exactly.
I don't have children, but wait a minute. Since you mentioned it, children's books, at some point I started my mother gave away all my children's books, you know, mothers. And I spent a lot of time hanging out in children's sections of the library trying to find The Littlest House, 100 Dresses. And I finally found these books from my childhood and have realized how important they've been to me. I have no idea how to write for children, but I know, the poem I read tonight is one. There's another poem in that book called Two Little Miners, which is, goodness, I could read it to you. It's full of rhyme, and it's a little bit shocking at this point because it's a little bit racist, which one would be surprised about in a little golden book. But I find children's books very inspiring, you know. And when I was dealing with Cole, I go to the library or I go to Google or whatever, and I would find these children's book titles, and I would get them. And it's an odd resource to have, but it's one I find quite delightful. This does not answer your question, but it's the best I can do with children's books.
I'm sorry if I missed
No, that's fine. That's fine. And I think, is this on? I think having mentioned the children's book that I was citing is probably the source of that.
It's a great question, and I think it's challenge, right? The genre, children's literature. And I think about how, maybe I think about this more in terms of like movies, of how you can balance, because I think I don't have kids either, but I imagine, or I've seen many a scene, right, where a parent's reading to a child, and right, you're reading like the same book over and over and over again, often, right? It's like the favorite, demand at bedtime. So I imagine you would want to write something that can stand up to that repetition, and also have something interesting for the adults reading it. Again, I think about this like in animated films all the time, right? Where there might be themes or like jokes that are more sophisticated and kind of meant for an adult audience, while at the same time maintaining that appeal for the children watching it, the intended audience. But yeah, I love children's books too. Someone just sent me beautiful hardcover edition of the stories of Frog and Toad, which are a delight, because I love that, one of them's like a curmudgeon and never wants to leave his home. And so I was talking with my best friend Sam about how we are Frog and Toad, and I'm the one who wants to stay at home, and he's the one who's like, let's go out and do things and like look at the world. And I'm like, no, please, I'm sleepy. So exact dynamic. But I think, they're kind of beautiful stories because they're about friendship and they're about how you can grow from these conversations, with friends. So yeah, I'm absolutely inspired as well.
Frog and Toad, I love Frog and Toad. I give Frog and Toad books to grown for presents. I'll say something else. My mother was a realist. She did not like animals in stories. She hated fairy tales. So I had a very warped childhood in that sense. She wanted stories about little girls and boys and with little girls to them, you know. She got The Wind in the Willows out of the library and she didn't like it and took it back. And I just recently, with my boyfriend, read The Wind in the Willows for the first time. I misremembered fairy tales because I didn't hear them, you know. So I had Goldilocks living with the three little bears, which was much nicer than home and like that. I don't know where I'm going with this, except to say that childhood stories are a part of who I am, you know, the remembering them, the misremembering them, the using them. And now that your question has come up, I remember other poems of mine where I do indeed talk about Goldilocks and the Good Gray Wolf. Good Gray Wolf is a character in one of my poems. It was really good. Doesn't do the bad thing with grandmother. It's a resource. If y'all writers have never looked at those books, go back to your childhood. See what those books that you read look like today. Could be interesting.
Another book rec, there's a great, I guess it's for all ages, basically. It's called Everyone Poops. It's a great, illustrated, very educational. Yeah, so if I were to ever write a children's book, it could probably be along those lines.
It's already been done.
I know, it's perfectly, so.
If you don't know, does everyone know this book? I mean, yeah, I mean, we have the animals of various sizes, the poop of various sizes. It's really quite, yes, quite. Thank you for your question. Look where it took us.
This is a question for Martha, but there's maybe another side to it, Chen, if you want to take it. Martha, I was noting how often you interrupt sentences, and was really curious. While Chen, we have the ands and the ampersands, the like Aristotle mentioned. And so I was curious for maybe for both of you about when you decide to allow the sentence to go all the way, when you cut yourself off partway through, or is there a like let it out and then erase process? How do you guys think about that?
Well, I don't erase. I often leave out to start with. I started writing fragment away, and they're not just short lines. There'll be a line, space, words, space, like that. Difficult material. It wasn't personal at that point, but it was difficult. And I found myself not knowing what to say next. I found myself stuttering, stammering, cutting myself off, not knowing where I was going. And I began to listen to those silences and to make them part of my voice, as they were part of my feelings. And so it's become something that I do, and I think it is generally true that I do when I'm sort of stammering my way into figuring out what I have to say. I'm not a quick writer. I don't write down long lines. I'm sometimes known to have written down 3 lines, and 6 months later I'll come back to them. So that's kind of built into my process. But it really is an emotional thing to me, a slowing down that's echoing something in me.
There's a great Dana Levin essay where she talks about the line break as butting up against something, right? And that there can be a hesitancy that's marked by the line break, or the inadequacy of language can be marked by the break. Yeah, I tend to go long, and I tend to overwrite in my drafting process. So revision often involves lots of cuts, small cuts, big cuts, and yet the poems are still, some of them are quite long. Yeah, the long breath. I think I'm drawn to what can accumulate, what can accrue, you know, like a tumbleweed or a snowball. Don't know what metaphor I really want to go, but something that, you know, is picking up bits and pieces as it goes along, and the kind of associative gesture that happens. I really gravitate toward that. And trying to see, you know, once I have that momentum, if I can stop in a really unexpected place, right? In the kind of listing motion, right? And just to continue to go, right? And. But yeah, so I love that cumulative power.
Process is a very different thing for different people. I had a student once who was a sculptor, and she was writing poems, and we had someone in the class who would write these mammoth poems and then cut, and then someone who could barely get out a haiku. And she said, oh, it's like sculpting. There's the person who works in stone who starts with this big block and carves away until something comes out. And then there's the person who starts with clay, who starts with nothing and has to build up. And I'm definitely a clay person. And others are, I mean, sometimes. I've been known to get carried away and write long lines and keep going. It's fun. But it's interesting. It's interesting to think about it that way with that method. And to not think that there's a right way to do it, because we are different.
Yeah, I've been trying to challenge myself. So I've been working on this sequence of short poems, and one of the constraints is that they have to be within 20 lines. But then, of course, I extend the line. You know, you can turn the paper, landscape, orientation. There are ways around your own rules, so.
Back a little bit. The first time I did documentary work, I saw an exhibit of lynching postcards and discovered that the hanging my father told me he had seen in southern Illinois as a kid, actually a lynching. The primary lynching victim was predictably a black man, and it stunned me. There were many postcards from this one lynching, and I couldn't leave it alone. And I was not used to doing this sort of documentary stuff at all. And I bought the book of lynching postcards. It's called Without Sanctuary. I carried it around. I thought, I can't write a poem about a lynching. That's what kind of thing is that? How can I possibly do that? Oh, and let me tell you something. I may tell my workshop this at some point. I have discovered that who my muses are. My muses are my censors. When the censor says, the censor may be a parent or a third grade teacher or the culture or whatever, says, you can't do that. I have learned to listen up, because that's something I probably have to do. So at some point I discovered that I needed to write about this lynching. When I did this, you think you're doing something no one has ever done before, right? I'm going to write this poem. Nobody's ever done anything like this. Okay, well, of course, people have done this. And I was well into this process when I remembered that I had been on a dissertation committee at Brandeis, And the dissertation person was a poet, Mary Leader, who had written about Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead. A year ago, I had been on a dissertation committee about this, and I thought I had no model. So I often consider Muriel Rukeyser the mother of us all. There are other mothers too, but certainly she is a very important person, and I remain grateful to her. The process, I could go on about that, but thank you for bringing her up, because I think she's important. She didn't really have anything to do with my going to Cole, because this has been on my mind forever, you know, because it's part of my heritage. But certainly as documentary example, she's important.
Well, thank you, Martha Collins and Chen Chen.
Thank you all back for being such a great audience and having such great questions. Thank you.
Remember, there are books by both of these wonderful poets on sale at the back of the room, and they will be signing books right up here. And come back tomorrow for another great faculty event with Campbell McGrath and Kimiko Hahn. Thank you very much. Have a great night.